is a picture, sort of artist's impression before the space age of what Venus might be like on its surface. And so this was looking at the planet Venus. It was science fiction and science fact all the way up to 56 before the start of the space age. But it wasn't completely disproved, this idea of a really sort of lush environment on Venus, until 1967, which is when the first measurements in detail were done at Venus. So Venera 4 and Mariner 5 confirmed the feeling from an earlier space mission that, in fact, the surface of Venus was not like this at all, but extremely hot, and also that the clouds were made of sulfuric acid, so there wasn't a nice water cycle like is going on in this picture. But it had to wait for these in situ measurements by a spacecraft to actually do that. And so Venus turned out not to be quite as Earth-like as we thought. And I'll sort of tell you about some of the latest results from Venus Express, which say actually there are some Earth-like features, but to a large extent it's not like the Earth. Okay, so a brief comparison between
Okay, so this is the big benefit of a universal philosophy. It says it applies to everybody. Well, looks, that doesn't, 205 or 206 countries in the world, and you've got something that applies to everybody. It's a bit strange, isn't it? No, it says liberal theory. There are some value structures that apply to all of us. You couldn't have the United Nations without it. It couldn't tell you that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights without this idea of values that apply to all of us just because we are humans. Now, the idea is to test that as well. Why is sport universal? Why does everybody play football? It's because the values are specified at a very thin level at the top. There are these rules and we all have to abide by just these rules. But there are lots of things about football that aren't rules specified. So Brazilian football is different from Italian football, from British football, from German football, from Spanish football. It's culturally specific, but acknowledges that there are these universal general rules that apply to everybody.
Last week we talked about how people recognize objects and really how well people recognize objects, given how difficult the problem is, given how objects can be seen in all different sorts of illumination, in different positions, in different angles. And yet we are able to extract that information. We are able to take the visual stuff out there, interpret it in a way that allows us to recognize all the different things that we can see in our environment. Today we're going to kind of carry on looking at that. We're going to look at what's really a special class of objects. That's the human face. We're going to look at how we recognize human faces and how we do it quite as well as we do. We're really expert at recognizing faces. So again, we can think about how do we take that visual information and how do we transfer it into a form which allows us to put a name to a face and to do all the other clever things we can do with faces. So I'm going to start off again by just pointing out that it's a hard problem. Face recognition is a hard problem, and it's a clever thing we do. If you think about all the different types of faces you can recognize and all the different types of information you can get from the face, you kind of start to appreciate how well we can do face recognition. But you can see from the relatively crooked and narrow streets of the city of Rome as they look from above today, you can see that, again, the city grew in a fairly ad hoc way, as I mentioned. It wasn't planned all at once. It just grew up over time, beginning in the 8th century BC. Now, this is interesting, because what we know about the Romans is when they left to their own devices and they could build the city from scratch, they didn't let it grow in an ad hoc way. They structured it in a very methodical way. That was basically based on military strategy and military planning. The Romans, they couldn't have conquered the world without obviously having a masterful military enterprise. And they were everywhere. They went on their various campaigns, their various military campaigns. They would build camps, and these camps were always laid out in a very geometrical plan along a grid, usually square or rectangular.
Child language acquisition. 3 little words. So let's take them one at a time. Child. When do you start being a child? For many people, language acquisition starts at around about 12 months when kids say their first word. But don't forget the first year. That first year of life is very important as well. And indeed, before you're born, remember, there are a couple of months before you're born when you're actually able to perceive in the womb something of the language that's around you. So language acquisition starts earlier than most people think. And it also ends later than most people think. When does child language acquisition stop? Well, in a sense, you know, we're all children. We stay being children all our lives. There's no obvious end point. For learning sounds, of course, there is, and for learning grammar, there is, but vocabulary, I mean, that goes on for the rest of our lives. 1 million or more words in English, and most of us only have a vocabulary of 50, 60, 70,000 words or whatever it is, and so there's always something more to learn. So remember that the two ends of child language acquisition are wider apart than some people think, and that means there's more scope for studying it than most people think.
Most Americans take energy for granted, but for many families, maintaining access to reliable and affordable energy is a persistent challenge and a significant material hardship. This is a problem referred to as energy insecurity, and it affects millions of American households each year. We have found that energy insecurity is a growing and vexing problem among low-income households, and the COVID-19 pandemic has made this problem worse. Our analysis finds that there are disparities in the rates of energy insecurity across various socio-demographic groups. Black and Hispanic households, for example, are significantly more likely to experience energy insecurity and face utility disconnection than white households. So too are households with young children, individuals that require electronic medical devices, and those in dwellings with inefficient or poor conditions. Households that cannot pay for energy are unable to power electronic learning or medical devices, keep perishable, healthy food in the refrigerator, or maintain safe body temperatures. Under conditions of extreme heat or cold, people can suffer from mental and physical health consequences, including the possibility of death. Strategies for coping with uncomfortable temperatures, such as burning trash or sitting in one's car with the heat running, can lead to tragic outcomes as well. Our research underscores the importance of public policy that targets energy insecurity and its underlying causes. Weatherization assistance, incentive for residential solar power, energy bill assistance, and utility disconnection protections are all viable strategies for helping the millions of households across the country that are currently unable to pay their energy bills. Mars is fourth planet from the Sun and the second smallest planet in the solar system after Mercury, named after the Roman god of war. It is often referred to as a red planet because the iron oxide prevalent on its surface gives it a reddish appearance. Mars is a terrestrial planet with a thin atmosphere, having surface features reminiscent both of the inner crater of the Moon and the volcanoes, valleys, deserts, and polar ice caps of the Earth. The rotational period and the seasonal cycles of the Mars are likewise similar to those of Earth, as it was the tilt that produces the seasons. Mars is the site of the Olympus Mons, the largest volcano and the second largest known mountain in the solar system, and the Valles Marineris, one of the largest canyons in the solar system. Until the first successful Mars flyby in 1965 by Mariner 4, many speculated about the presence of liquid water on the planet's surface. This was based on observed periodic variation in the light and dark patches, particularly in the polar latitude, which appeared to be seas and continents. Geological evidence gathered by the unmanned mission suggested that Mars once have large scale of water coverage on the surface on some earlier stages of existence. Many parents communicate and educate their children with two languages, probably because they both know more than one language or they come from different countries. Most of these parents think this can benefit their children's language learning, but actually kids will get confused when their parents use different languages from each other to describe the same subject. If one parent sticks to one language and the other one sticks to another, their children will not be confused anymore.
A leader can define or clarify goals by issuing a memo or an executive order, an edict or a fatwa or a tweet, by passing a law, barking a command, or presenting an interesting idea in a meeting of colleagues. Leaders can mobilize people's energies in ways that range from subtle, quiet persuasion to the coercive threat or the use of deadly force. Sometimes a charismatic leader such as Martin Luther King Jr. can define goals and mobilize energies through rhetoric and the power of example. We can think of leadership as a spectrum, in terms of both visibility and the power the leader wields. On one end of the spectrum, we have the most visible, authoritative leaders like the President of the United States or the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, or a dictator such as Hitler or Gaddafi. At the opposite end of the spectrum is casual, low-key leadership found in countless situations every day around the world, leadership that can make a significant difference to the individuals whose lives are touched by it. Over the centuries, the first kind, the out-in-front, authoritative leadership, has generally been exhibited by men. Some men in positions of great authority, including Nelson Mandela, have chosen a strategy of leading from behind. More often, however, top leaders have been quite visible in their exercise of power. Women, as well as some men, have provided casual, low-key leadership behind the scenes. But this pattern has been changing, as more women have taken up opportunities for visible, authoritative leadership.
People forget things every day, including experiences, feelings, and thoughts. We call this process biological forgetting. Remembering is hard for people, and people try to overcome biological forgetting. Human memory is not fixed, but it can be reconstructed and shaped by the past. Since ancestors, we have always been trying to improve our memory.